So I just watched Puss in Boots and I have to say everyone was right. All the reviews, all the praise that this movie got is well deserved, which got me thinking about Disney Pixar movies. Now it's not a secret that Disney movies are not doing so hot anymore. I mean they still have hits every now and then, but it's still not like before when you could expect most Disney Pixar movies to succeed. Strange World is an example of such movies, and I want to compare Puss in Boots, The Last Wish and Strange World and see what Disney could have done to make Strange World a better movie. By the way, I have already made a review on Strange World. If you want to watch that, there should be a link below in description. Anyways, you might be wondering why I'm comparing these two movies together. Strange World is possibly Disney's weakest movie and Puss in Boots The Last Wish is probably the strongest animated movie to have come out recently. Why not compare this movie to Encanto or Soul? Well, there is a specific reason for that, and if you have been a bit more keen, you might have noticed it too. I am talking about the lack of villains in Disney movies recently. Now Disney has made amazing movies without a villain like Souls, which is probably my favorite Disney Pixar movie of all time, and I can dedicate a whole video on that movie alone. Maybe I will in the future, but recently I do believe that there is a void in Disney movies, a void that only a good villain could fill. And I think Strange World is a good example of that kind of a movie. I just have to be clear, I want to assure you that it is not a conspiracy that Disney hates villains. In Strange World, Ethan and his dad Searcher and his grandfather Jaeger-Clade would have this very conversation, where Searcher and Jaeger-Clade would insist that you need a villain to make this game interesting that they are playing, and Ethan, being the youngest, which by default makes him the smartest, says that there is no villain in this game. And that scene was an allegory for the entire movie, in which they realized that the creatures that they thought were their enemies were in fact the good guys. And this movie is a byproduct of that very philosophy that Disney has adopted, that you don't need a villain, and Disney is focusing more on abstract adversaries in their movies like existential crises, mental health issues, or standing up to your parents or teaching your elders a valuable lesson. Which almost sounds bad, but I think it's creative and a lot of good films have come from this very philosophy like Soul and Encanto, maybe even Luca. But I think you cannot milk this same philosophy year after year again. At some point it will just get redundant and then the cliche of a villain might be more appealing, and this very point brings me to Puss in Boots. I heard a lot of reviews and people saying that this movie had the best villain ever, which definitely got my hopes really high. But when I watched the movie, I think I was a little bit disappointed. I think calling him a great villain is a bit of an overstatement. I think at best, the villain in Puss in Boots is a really good plot device, because Puss needed exactly that very villain to overcome his fear of death, and that itself was the villain of this movie. So yeah, he is death personified, the Grim Reaper. The sickles definitely make more sense now. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that if that was replaced by some other villain in this movie, then this movie would not have the same amazing outcome that it has right now. Hence why I call this villain a really good plot device, or in other words, a perfect obstacle for Puss to overcome and become a better character. And it's definitely a bit of a cliche to have a perfect villain to suit the needs of your protagonist and push them in a way to make them a better character. And I don't mean any disrespect by that. I think that some cliches are good and that this movie is definitely a proof of that. And this movie felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the Disney Pixar movies about the same philosophy year after year. And after that many years, a simple cliche felt like a breath of fresh air. And again, I'm only calling the villain aspect of the movie a cliche because obviously the movie of Puss in Boots is much more than just that. It's about fear of overcoming your own mortality and letting go of who you are and accepting the next stage of your life. Now you might notice what I'm describing falls into the Disney philosophy. It means that Puss in Boots does exactly what Disney movies are doing right now, but with a good villain to add a great flair to their movies. That is what I mean when I say that Disney movies feel like they have a void in them, because that void can only be filled by a good villain to bring a new energy and a flair to their movies. That very same flair and energy was missing from the movie Strange World. It's a movie about adventure and action, and I think that kind of genre was begging for a good villain. And the movie Strange World almost had a villain, but I think they decided to do a U-turn and avoid it. I'm talking about Callisto Mall. Towards the end of the movie, she decides to complete her mission and ignore the new information that Searcher and Ethan Clade had brought about the creatures being friendly and that the thing that they were protecting was a virus or a disease. But that only happens momentarily and she becomes a good character again. I think it would have been much more interesting if she remained that very obstacle for the rest of the movie. Maybe even give greed as a motivation to fuel her evilness. Because the virus that they were protecting made the city really rich and it progressed the technology a lot as well. What if she was a greedy character who came here only to protect that very profitable thing and kill the creatures attacking it? But when she figures out that the thing she came here to protect was just a virus, what then? What if she continues to protect the virus because of greed and power? This is just a random idea, but another idea could be that the virus that they were there to destroy was also sentient, just like the creatures in the Strange World. It's more simplistic but definitely more interesting than what this movie already presented. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the villains make the movies that much more amazing. There are villains that people love more than the protagonist. The Dark Knight Rises would not have been as great as it was if not for the Joker. Same with Thanos in Infinity War. I would say these villains carry these films that they are in, and villains are entities that you cannot completely get rid of from cinema. I think Disney's idea of removing villains is good and it forces you to think outside of the box. But I think I'm really starved for good villains. It's not just me, I think everyone is starved for a good villain, and Puss in Boots The Last Wish is a good example of that very thing. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video, and for now, it's a goodbye.